Welcome back. It is day 38 of our 90-day New Testament reading plan with New Life Youth. My name is Christian. I am glad you are here joining us today. Today we have read through Acts 22 through Acts 24. And I'm going to be honest today, I don't think I really have too much commentary from today's reading. I think it was kind of straightforward for the most part, kind of entering in these last moments for Paul in the book of Acts and the last parts of his missionary journey. But let's go ahead and dive right in anyways, okay? So we are, like I said, seeing this story unfold for Paul's final missionary journey. There is an interesting mirroring here for Paul in regards to the path Jesus also walked as we're thinking of that path towards suffering. Paul here, he was welcomed into Jerusalem pretty warmly, right? And then this scene starts to unfold that's pretty tumultuous. It gets pretty intense pretty quick, I think. And Paul, he is arrested and he is defending himself before these people, before the Sanhedrin. These sufferings that Paul suffered or went through, and not just here, but really throughout his journey as a missionary, spreading the gospel throughout his journey, this is something that he rejoices over. He rejoices over these sufferings he's faced. In Colossians, Paul says this. He says, "I rejoice in what was suffered for you, and I fill up in my flesh what is lacking in regard to Christ's afflictions for the sake of his body, which is the church." This suffering Paul is going through is not even just a physical suffering like Christ, but it is carrying out this ministerial suffering that Jesus Christ, he started this redemptive work and we are carrying it out still. And that is really what Paul is talking about in regards to this suffering that he is carrying out. It's not just a physical, literal suffering, but is a ministerial suffering that has been laid out that Jesus started. And we, even as believers today, we carry that on. Paul is a minister of the gospel. He is carrying out that suffering. Now we see that Paul does not suffer death here, but we see him just walking out this ministerial suffering of a path. And sometimes that means physical suffering too, being jailed and persecuted, but ultimately it is a ministerial suffering. Let's see how many times I can say ministerial suffering, right? But through all of this, what's amazing is Paul gets to recount everything that God has done in his life, everything that God has done, and he continues to proclaim the gospel. That is so much a part of what we are seeing. But some of these things continue just to be very racially driven. As we are seeing Paul's story unfold, Paul mentions that God is going to send him to the Gentiles. And we see that, I think, in Acts 22, verse 12. 22, verse 21. 22 verse 21, he says that. He says, the Lord said to me, "Go, I will send you far away to the Gentiles." And this is what throws the Jews into an uproar. This is what really upsets them. And this, of course, as we've read before, is very racially driven, right? This is a race thing. This word Gentiles is what sends them over the top. They didn't really have a problem with, the Jews didn't have a problem with Gentiles becoming Jews or converting to Judaism, but this idea of Jews converting to Christianity without becoming a Jew first was upsetting and offending to them, a little bit off-putting for them. The reality is, we know this, the gospel is for all people. Jew, Gentile, it doesn't matter. Rich, poor, young, old, gender, none of those things matter. The gospel is meant for all people. But the Jews still have this issue because in their eyes, they are a step above Gentiles. They think they're better than Gentiles. And so hearing that they are actually on the same level playing field in God's kingdom is upsetting for them, because this is a new thing for them to be walking out. And this is what is so upsetting for them and causes them to riot. But through all of this, Paul is able to preach boldly the gospel. He is continuously bold. And what is cool is we are just seeing God's hand on his life in all aspects. We are seeing God's protection. We see this moment of encouragement from the Lord to Paul where he says, "Take courage as you have testified about me in Jerusalem, so you must also testify in Rome. So you know that his hand of protection is on Paul, and Paul is seeing that as well. God's not done with Paul yet. I don't know what that song is, but it's if I'm not dead, then you're not done, right? That is playing out so much here for Paul, right? There are other things. There are people who are coming to his aid to warn him. Certain individuals being put in place to protect him, really. And even his citizenship as a Roman plays a part in this protection and God's hand on Paul. And so we see all of these things working, but it's not just for Paul's good. It is for the good of the kingdom so that the gospel can continue to spread. There is great risk here for Paul, but the reward of the spread of the gospel is what is keeping him going. And so what an encouragement there of God's hand protecting Paul, and just taking that risk continually, being bold because of the spread of the gospel. And so through and through, we just see boldness from Paul throughout the entirety of this, through these trials, through all these conversations, through these times of evangelism. Paul's just bold. It's just constantly boldness. And so people here, the Jews, were trying to paint him as a political threat, a rioter, a terrorist of sorts, pointing out that even the sect that he represents is Nazarene. That was an issue because Nazareth was lowly, or considered to be lowly. It was looked down upon. I don't know if you remember Nathanael and Philip, their interaction when Jesus is calling them as disciples, but Nathanael says, what good can come out of Nazareth, right? So there is this idea that Nazareth is still this lowly place. And so these Jews are trying to stir up dissension, or show that there is dissension happening. And being part of a religious sect without Roman approval was contrary to law. And so they're trying to paint all these pictures of Paul and what he is doing and causing all this chaos, but really it's not him causing the chaos. It is these Jews who are getting stirred up that are just making his life difficult and causing this to happen. But again, we can just point to this idea that as there is persecution, the gospel continues to spread. Without these things happening, even would Paul ever had a chance to stand before this Sanhedrin, before this group of Pharisees and Sadducees, before Felix and Tertullus and all these different people? Tertullus is just a fun name to say. All through this boldness, we even see Paul has this opportunity to preach a message to Felix and to his wife, which we get this idea that it was concerning for Felix. Hearing this message for him and his wife, it was a message of righteousness, and it was a message of self-control and judgment that would be coming. And we see that Felix was afraid. Now, was this an actual change of heart for Felix? Apparently not, because he keeps Paul in jail and continues to just hope for a bribe, really. And so there was no change of heart, but there are these opportunities for Paul to continue to preach. And I think the encouraging thing for us is just this boldness from Paul. We get to see this boldness. But here's the reality too. Paul is not just bold in the sense of I'm just going around doing all these things, even stirring up trouble, boldness or foolishness. He is very wise with all of his boldness. He takes the opportunity to speak when he has the opportunities. And even as he is dealing with the high priest, he apologizes. He's like, I didn't realize you were the high priest. I'm sorry. There are these moments where Paul just shows incredible boldness, but also wisdom. And so those things he is using to his advantage and just working hand in hand. And so I think there's something there for us as well, too, that there is boldness and there's wisdom, and those things go hand in hand. Definitely something to be said about that. But really, hey, that's all I have for today. I think a lot of today's reading was kind of cut and dry, very straightforward. Definitely some cultural nuances still that we might miss out on in the reading, but always worth a dig in deeper and to look a little bit closer to understand some of those. But let us know today what you are learning from today's reading, what you're picking up on, if you're seeing something that we haven't talked about. So we'd love to hear from you. So make sure to be interactive here today on YouTube or in the YouVersion Bible Plan. And of course, as always, we hope to see you tomorrow.